You added 5 million new users. What's the main driver of that this quarter?
Well, we've been working hard for years to drive better relevance on Twitter, to make Twitter more conversational, to make sure that people can find the topics and events that they care about most, whether it's when they come to Twitter or through notifications. We continue to make improvements there this quarter, and it delivered 14% year-over-year growth in DAU.
But that's quite a boost. So is there anything specific that you turned on, turned off in the last quarter that worked especially well?
It's a series of things. So we wouldn't point to any one thing so much as we would point to years of work, which starts with the clarity of why people come to Twitter. They come to stay informed, to discuss what matters, and to inform others. And when you have that clarity, then you start doing work that's designed around those things. And the work that we did a year ago and 2 years ago, that benefits the people who are new to Twitter today just as much as the work did this past quarter. So it's really an accumulation of our work around those areas I mentioned that's driven the DAU performance.
Now, there was a notable blip in the forecast, which is generally lighter than what analysts had projected. So what's driving a softer forecast? Is that changes to the ad format or something else?
We guided for 7 to 15% revenue growth in the third quarter. That's lower than the revenue growth that we delivered in Q1 and Q2, where we grew revenue 18%. We point to a few things. The first is our broad global business recovery began, or really was firing on all cylinders in Q3 of last year, where we grew 44% in Japan, where we grew in the 20s in the United States. So we're lapping tougher comps. Second is we have actually retired some older ad formats that we felt if we prioritized our work and if we focused our team on the most important priorities, they wouldn't be working on those ad formats. You lose some near-term revenue when you make those decisions, but they're better long-term decisions for the company. And those are the kinds of things, along with this long-term projects that we're working on that won't pay off in Q3, but will pay off over time, that affect the guidance.
Speaking of long-term projects, you've been working on a beta app. What have you learned? When are we going to see it?
Well, we have a prototype. We call it Little T. A few thousand people get to play around with our latest thinking in ways that we can make Twitter more conversational and that we can get people focused on the topics and events that they care about most. When we find things that work in Little T, we want to bring them to the main app. And it just takes time to figure out what's working best and to bring it over. But this is about making it easier to find the things you're looking for. It's about making it easier to follow a conversation than it might be today. Thinking about swiping instead of pushing on a like button. Thinking about ways to help people get to a list of things that they care about faster than they can today in the main app.
So we're not going to see like a complete overhaul. You're just taking small learnings day to day and trying to integrate that into big T, if you will.
Well, I think about the last couple of years and the steady improvement that we've brought to the main app as a great example of what you should look for going forward. Today, the work around Little T is on making it more conversational, but over time we can use it to test whatever it is that the product team's excited about, to learn and get feedback from a few thousand people before we roll it out to more than 100 million.
Now, over half your revenue comes from the United States, and yet U.S. users represent 21% of overall users. What's taking so long to expand internationally? Are we going to see the numbers catch up?
Well, we start with our purpose, which is to serve the public conversation. We're pleased that 80% of the people who use Twitter are outside of the United States, and we're confident that if we can get more people to use Twitter, that the ad dollars will sort themselves out. But you're right that right now the U.S. is a more mature ad market. It's more clear to advertisers how best to connect with their customers on Twitter in the United States as opposed to outside the U.S., and that's something that we'll have to address over time. But we feel confident that we've got the right messages with advertisers and that they're really resonating, that Twitter's a place you come to launch a new product or service and where you come to connect with what's happening.
In the past, U.S. elections haven't done much to boost Twitter's business, despite the drama we see on there. Do you think that'll be different in 2020, given the number of Democratic presidential candidates and the fact that they're running against President Trump?
Well, remember, it's always an election year on Twitter, whether it's in the U.S., where we had midterms in 2018, and there's already debates and lots of conversation happening on Twitter around the presidential election, or 600 million people voting a couple months ago in India, or Brazil, or Mexico, or other parts of the world where there have been important elections. people come to Twitter to talk about those things, and it's our job to make sure they can trust the information that they see, that they can be comfortable being a part of the conversation, that it's easy to find what they're looking for. So we look at these events all around the world as important opportunities to show people what Twitter can deliver.
But given that more than half your revenue is from the U.S., do you think this election in particular will be any sort of driver, that you will see any sort of bump or plateau or spike as a result?
When we look at 2020, there are all kinds of great things that are going to happen. Along with the presidential election, there's the Olympics. We announced a relationship with NBC yesterday where people are going to be able to go onto Twitter and vote for what they see on Twitter. They're going to see near real-time highlights from the Olympics. This is a major evolution from what we did around the Olympics 4 years ago, and is another great example of what you'll see in 2020, along with a lot of product work. There are events and topics happening all the time, and the U.S. elections are just one example of it.
There's a new report out today that the Russians managed to hack election systems in all 50 states. Bob Mueller, in his testimony, former special counsel, emphasized that foreign actors are trying to hack our democracy right now. Is Twitter ready for 2020, and what are you going to be doing differently than you did in 2016?
Well, we've learned so much since the 2016 presidential elections, and we've been able to test and learn through many elections since then all over the world. A few examples that I'd share. One is, it's now really clear who's buying ads around political events all around the world. You go to ads.twitter.com, you can see who's buying a political ad, who they're targeting, even how much they're paying. It's unprecedented transparency. We make it clear who the candidate is so that you can know if the person is who they say they are. We've done a tremendous amount of work to remove spammy and suspicious behavior so that things aren't getting amplified any more than they should be by spammy or suspicious accounts. So we think we've made a lot of progress, but there's definitely more work for us to do.
Facebook has been facing a storm of controversies over the last couple of years, but just in the last week, we've learned of a DOJ investigation into antitrust and big tech in general, and also an FTC investigation, antitrust investigation into Facebook in particular. Is that an opportunity for Twitter?
We feel like by focusing on the things that we can control, which is helping the people who come to Twitter every day find the things that they're looking for, focusing on helping them stay informed, discussing what matters and informing others, that we can have a lot of room to succeed without having to worry about others, whether it's from how people use the service or even how advertisers use the service. So we really tend to focus more on that.
The DOJ hasn't been specific about which companies they're looking at, but do you have any sense of whether Twitter is involved?
We're always talking to regulators all over the world to make sure that they understand our priorities, to help them understand how we think about the health of the public conversation on Twitter, and to hear from them what we can do to make sure that we're reflecting their concerns. And those conversations are always an important part of our work.